Good evening. Welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the City of Kettering Planning Commission for March 7th, 2022. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Miami Valley Cable Council for televising and taping tonight's meeting for rebroadcast on Channel 6 and streaming live over the internet at mvcc.net. It will also be recorded and available for later viewing on mvcc.net. Since this meeting is both audio and videotaped to form a complete record for possible appeal to City Council and/or the courts, it is important that anyone who wishes to address the Commission will need to come to the lectern, speak into the microphone, and give their name and address for the record. Planning Commission is a volunteer independent body appointed by Council whose mission is to hear all bodies involved and subsequently make a motion to approve, deny, continue, or recommend the application. All action by the Commission can be appealed to City Council. This time I'd like to introduce the commissioners. On my far left is Ken Lackey, our Assistant Secretary. On his right is Carol Fisher, our Secretary. On my immediate left is Connie Gaw, our Recording Secretary. My name is Don Shimon. I am the current chair. On my right is Ray Waskey, the Vice Chair. And on the right end is Commissioner Don Rethman. For staff tonight, we have Ryan Holmesy, who is a city planner. This time, the first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of February 7th, 2022. Do we have any discussion on the minutes? We have a motion to approve.
I've read the minutes over and found them to be correct. I move for their approval.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, since we have a motion and a second, can we call the roll, please?
Mr. Waskey?
Yes.
Mrs. Fisher?
Yes.
Mr. Rathman?
Yes.
Mr. Lackey?
Yes.
Mr. Shimon?
Yes. Next item on the agenda is new business, zoning map amendment to rezone 2125 East Dorothy from EDO 14 to B business. This is PC-22-002, and it is a public hearing. And for staff, I'm going to guess that it is Mr. Holmesy.
Yes. Am I good to go? Thank you, Chairman. Good evening. This item is a rezoning of about a half-acre piece of property at the northwest corner of the intersection of East Dorothy and Woodman Drive, outlined in red there. It used to be, it's currently vacant, but it used to house the, I believe it's called the Throckmorton's Garden Center. It's been there for a number of years. It's been vacant for at least 2 years, probably a little bit longer. And to the west of it is the vacant former Aaron's Rent, and this application only involves this property outlined in red there. Here's a picture of the existing conditions looking northwest toward the Kroger, and you can kind of see the Aaron's Rent's building here. This is the former Throckmorton's, and you can see it's just vacant, a vacant building, including the vacant parking areas and associated drive aisles. One of the more interesting parts of this request, I know there's been a few either portions of economic development overlays rezoned recently or entire EDOs rezoned recently. And in the case of EDO 14, which is kind of highlighted in peach there on our zoning map, the subject property is in the bottom right-hand corner here. A couple years ago, the Applebee's was rezoned from the EDO 14 designation to the B designation, and I believe that was triggered by them wanting to change their signs or put more different awnings up, and they weren't able to because the regulations of the EDO are very strict, and they just don't work well for redeveloping properties, whether they're occupied by a tenant who wants to make some changes or vacant and on the market for sale for a new potential tenant. So incrementally over time, over the last several years, portions of some EDOs and entire other EDOs have been rezoned to base zoning districts. And I believe in 2019, city staff did a review of all the EDOs in the city to determine if they were to be rezoned in the future, what base zoning districts make the most sense. In the case of EDO 14, basically this line here, the northern side, at the northern edge of the Kroger property to the west, the appropriate zoning designations were determined to be B business, and this property falls within that area. So here's just a zoomed in version of the same zoning map of the existing zoning. And the zoning that is requested by the applicant is to rezone that corner to B business, and that's shown on the screen now. Per the zoning code, section 1153.12.6, section A, prior to making a recommendation to City Council on a proposed map amendment, the Planning Commission shall make a finding to determine if the following conditions exist, and no map amendment shall be recommended for approval to a specific and documented, recommended for approval prior to a specific and documented finding of at least one of the following 5 standards. And the first standard is that the proposed amendment is consistent with the City of Kettering's comprehensive plan and with the intent of the zoning code, or that such consistency is being sought concurrently. This standard is actually met. In the report that went out on the screen now is the future land use plan for the City of Kettering from our comprehensive plan. The subject property is within the sub-regional commercial category, kind of highlighted there, which includes the Kroger site and some properties to the north and across Woodman to the, or across Dorothy to the south. And within the land use plan, the recommended uses for this land use designation are retail, office, residential, and civic uses, which the B zoning district accommodate all of those uses pretty well. And a lot of the uses that are permitted within the EDO 14 district, including things like bars, fast food restaurants, professional offices, things of that nature are already permitted within the EDO today. Criteria number 2, there has been a change in demand for land that alters the information upon which the official zoning map is based. This is not applicable. Number 3, a study commissioned or conducted by city staff indicates that there has been an increase in the demand for land in the requested zoning classification, and as a result, the supply of land within the City of Kettering mapped as such on the official zoning map or official development pattern map is inadequate to meet the demands for such development, and no such study has been conducted, so this is not applicable. Number 4, the proposed use cannot be accommodated by sites already zoned in the city due to a lack of transportation or utilities or other similar development constraints, or the market to be served by the proposed use cannot be efficiently served by the geographic location of the existing zoning districts. And in the report, staff said the proposed amendment would accommodate existing and currently proposed land uses which are currently permitted under the EDO. Therefore, this does not apply. And finally, number 5, this is the one standard that is not met, and that is that an error in the zoning code or text or official zoning map or official development pattern, or there is an error in the zoning map and there is not. This was very intentionally rezoned to EDO at one time, and that zoning designation just no longer works very well for redevelopment, which is why this rezoning is being sought today. Also, in the next section of the zoning code, the Planning Commission shall consider each of the following matters based on the evidence presented to it when reviewing rezoning applications. Number 1, the extent to which the proposed amendment and proposed use are in compliance and deviate from adopted plans, goals, and policies. As discussed earlier, this rezoning is in compliance with the land use plan for the city. Number 2, the suitability of the property in question for the uses permitted under the proposed zoning or for the development requirements under the proposed development pattern. The property is well suited to the uses permitted within the proposed district, and many of the uses that are currently permitted on the property today will remain permitted should the property be rezoned. Number 3, looking at the adequacy of public facilities such as transportation, utilities, and other required public services to serve the proposed use. Being at the intersection of 2 major thoroughfares, the site is well served by public infrastructure. It's essentially a gray field site. The site is located near a major intersection, and utilities and other required public services are fully developed and currently in place. Number 4, the effect of the proposed development on surrounding uses. The proposed rezoning imparts no tangible changes to the surrounding uses. The rezoning will broaden the allowable commercial uses on the property, but not in a way that would be out of character with the surrounding land uses, which include a grocery store, a few fueling stations, and fast food restaurants. Number 5, the effect of the proposed amendment on the economic viability of existing developed and vacant land within the city. And again, similar to the last standard, the proposed rezoning imparts no tangible changes to the economic viability of developed and vacant land in the city with the same zoning designation. And the last section, or the last standard that the Planning Commission should review is that The Planning Commission shall not recommend that the adoption of a proposed amendment unless it finds that the adoption of such an amendment is in the public interest and not solely for the interest of the applicant. Now, of course, there is an applicant who wants to rezone it, so there is some interest there from them for this rezoning to be approved. But as I mentioned earlier, staff has been working on rezoning these EDOs just to get them into base zoning districts to help streamline future development. And if this rezoning is approved, it will allow for the expedient, efficient, fair, and uniform application of the zoning code for the subject property moving forward. As it's zoned today, EDO 14, there's 4 different zones, each one with their own use list and design standards. The design standards are fairly similar, but one of the reasons that the staff wants to that we're seeking to rezone some of these is that the zoning code regulates all the things that exist within the EDO regulations. So by rezoning it, it makes it more clear and fair how properties are to be developed and redeveloped in the future. And finally, I'll just read this last section of the code about how the Planning Commission can make recommendations to council. And that is that the Planning Commission may recommend that the application be granted as requested, or it may recommend a modification of the amendment requested, or it may recommend that the request be denied. These recommendations shall be forwarded to City Council. And staff does have a recommendation, but I will get into that in a little later. But I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any. And I know there's at least one person here on behalf of the applicant and one person here on behalf of the seller of the owner of the property.
Okay, we'll first see if there's any questions for you. Mr. Lackey?
No, I don't have anything.
Ms. Fisher? Mr. Waske?
I have none.
Mr. Rethman?
No questions.
And I have none at this time. So if the applicant would like to address us, or an applicant representative, you do not have to. If you would like to add anything, seeing a wave of the hand, we will pass on that. You will have the opportunity if something comes up and you do want to address it. Next would be audience participation. If anyone in the audience would like to speak to the commission on this. Seeing none, staff recommendation.
Thank you, Chairman. The staff recommendation is that, as laid out in the report, based upon the evidence presented and the analysis and findings made within the staff report and this presentation, staff recommends that the request for approval of the zoning map amendment to rezone the subject property from EDO 14 be forwarded to City Council with the recommendation for approval.
All right, thank you. Any final comments, discussion from Commission? Nope. Since this is a public hearing, can I get a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Mr. Rethman?
Yes.
Mr. Waske?
Yes.
Mrs. Fisher?
Yes.
Mr. Lackey?
Yes.
Mr. Shimon?
Yes. All right. I believe, Mr. Waske, you have a motion for us?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I do. This is motion whereas an application has been received from Kyle Fleming of JM Civil Engineering, 1101 Central Expressway South, Suite 215, Allen, Texas, 75013, requesting approval of a rezoning from Economic Development Overlay Number 14 to B Business of the property addressed 2125 East Dorothy Lane. And whereas the Planning Commission has reviewed the facts surrounding this request, including an oral and written report by city staff, which is included herein, and held a public hearing on March 7th, 2022. And whereas this request constitutes approval of a rezoning from EDO number 14 zoning district to B business, and whereas the Planning Commission adopts the findings of fact presented by staff in their report, which is incorporated into this motion, I move that the applicant's request for approval of a zoning from EDO number 14 zoning district to B business, as shown on page 2 of attachment B, proposed zoning map, be recommended to City Council for approval.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Call the roll. Oh,
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Rethman.
in the, for Mr. Waske, in the second paragraph, sort of towards the end there, it's like, which is, I heard you read included versus incorporated. Was that intentional?
No, that was not.
And then in the last I move, I heard zoning versus rezoning. Did anybody else catch that? Was that intentional? I move that the applicant's request for approval of a,
Rezoning, should be rezoning.
okay,
That was not intentional either.
Okay.
My mistakes.
no worries.
You're sharp.
So, that's
All
all I have.
right. So as amended, we have or not amended, but it's corrected. Let's go with that language. As corrected, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Nope. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Woski,
Yes.
Mrs. Fisher,
Yes.
Mr. Rethman,
Yes.
Mr. Lackey,
Yes.
Mr. Shimon.
Yes. All right, next item on the agenda is audience participation for items not on the agenda. So if anyone in the audience would like to talk to us about anything, feel free to come forward. Seeing none, moving on to other business, signing of plats,
We do not have any.
communications and reports.
We do not have any. The only active application we have now is for a very simple record plan combining a couple residential properties together. There's a few things floating out there we might get applications for soon, but that's the main one that we have right now.
All right. Planning Commission comments. Mr. Lackey?
I don't have anything tonight.
Ms. Fisher? Mr. Woski?
I have none.
Mr. Rethman?
No questions or comments?
I have none myself, so that being, all our business being concluded, we will adjourn this meeting until our next regularly scheduled meeting we'll adjourn at 7:16 p.m.